I woke up on New Year's Day to a silence so absolute it felt staged, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire house. The air was cold sharp enough that my breath puffed out in front of me as I sat up in bed. Normally, New Year's morning came with leftover warmth from the night before half-washed cocktail glasses, the scent of cinnamon and sparkling cider, my mom humming as she made breakfast, my dad sweeping confetti off the floor, my sister, Morgan, stomping around complaining about her hangover. But this morning there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no clatter of pans, no heater humming. The air smelled faintly of bleach, which made no sense unless someone had cleaned in the middle of the night. A thin line of winter light slid under my bedroom door, hitting the floor at an angle that made the empty quiet feel even colder. I swung my legs out of bed, shivering as my feet hit the wood floor. "Mom," I called out softly. Nothing. Dad, still nothing. Even the old house didn't creak, a house that always had something to say. I pressed my palm against my bedroom door, as if checking the temperature of whatever waited on the other side. Then I pushed it open. The hallway was too bright, too clean, too still. I stepped into it, slowly hugging my arms around my body as I moved toward the top of the stairs. The banister felt icy under my hand. From there, I could see the edge of the living room downstairs, too tidy, too bare, like someone had reset it overnight. I tried again, louder this time. Morgan's silence swallowed her name whole. My chest tightened as I descended the stairs, one careful step at a time. The living room came into full view and the breath left my lungs. The couch cushions were perfectly aligned. The coffee table was spotless. The rug looked freshly vacuumed. Even the Christmas tree, which we always left up through the first week of January, was gone. Just a faint ring where the stand used to sit. My heart thudded as I crossed into the kitchen. The counters sparkled, every appliance wiped down. No crumbs, no mugs, no signs of breakfast prep. My mom never left the kitchen empty on a holiday morning. She always had something softening, thawing, marinating, but now everything was tucked away, sterile, erased. I reached for the coffee machine out of habit, but the cord hung loose, it had been unplugged. My stomach sank. Then I saw it. A folded piece of paper on the dining table, held in place by a glass paperweight we'd never used for anything. I stopped breathing for a few seconds before I stepped forward and picked it up. The handwriting, sharp, hurried, was almost unrecognizable. "Lena, we flew to Bora Bora. It's a family trip. You wouldn't enjoy the long flight. Back in 10 days. Mom," I stared until the ink blurred. Bora Bora. A luxury vacation. A family trip. Without me. A cold, clean ache spread through my chest. I sank into the nearest chair because my legs didn't feel strong enough to hold me. The words looped through my head. You wouldn't enjoy the long flight, as if I were a fragile inconvenience. As if they were doing me a kindness by excluding me. Back in 10 days. Like I was a pet being left with a neighbor. The heater still wasn't on and the chill crawled up my spine as I forced myself to stand again. I walked through the kitchen, opening the fridge. Empty. Completely empty. They hadn't just left, they had prepared to leave. The garbage bin had a new liner. All leftovers were gone. Every trace of celebration erased in the middle of the night. I moved the mudroom, heart pounding harder now. The hooks where coats usually hung were bare. The shoe rack empty except for my boots. The garage door creaked as I opened it and I felt the cold slap me in the face. The SUV was gone. Morgan's hatchback was gone. Only my old sedan sat in the corner like a forgotten afterthought. I shut the door slowly, as if sudden movement might make the truth worse. Upstairs, I moved through each room, hoping for an absurd explanation that would make all of this make sense. My parents' bed was made. Their suitcases were missing. The nightstand drawers were open, as if they'd been rifled through quickly. In Morgan's room, half her closet was emptied. Makeup bags gone. Favorite jacket missing. A packing list sat crumpled on her vanity. Bora Bora swimsuits, charger, sunscreen. 3 seats confirmed. 3 seats. I picked up the paper with trembling fingers. There was no spot where a fourth seat had ever been considered. My room was next. The instant I stepped inside, I felt it. Something was different. Subtle but wrong. My nightstand drawer was cracked open. My jewelry box slightly shifted. I opened the drawer fully and felt my heartbeat drop. My passport wasn't there. I always kept it in the same place. Always. Someone had gone through my things. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking now with something deeper than shock. They didn't just leave without me. They made sure I couldn't follow. I stood up again, moving on instinct, drawn to the front door by some force I didn't understand. When I opened it, the morning hit me bright, icy, indifferent. Snow dusted the driveway except for 2 rectangular patches where the cars had sat, clear outlines. They'd left hours ago. "Lena," a voice called softly. I turned. Mrs. Lopez, my neighbor across the street, stood on her porch wrapped in a robe, her breath fogging in the air. "I didn't want to bother you last night," she said, "but I saw your family leaving around 2 in the morning. I thought you were going with them." My breath caught in my throat. 2 in the morning, while I slept, while the world was celebrating a new year. They left like thieves. Or maybe like people escaping someone they didn't want. I couldn't speak. I just nodded numbly and stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind me. And as the lock clicked into place, the truth settled over me, cold, heavy, final. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a decision. And for the first time standing in the hollow quiet of that house, I understood something I had spent years refusing to see. They didn't forget me. They didn't lose track of time. They didn't assume I'd join later. They left because they wanted a family trip, and in their eyes, I wasn't part of the family. I stood in the entryway for a long moment, the cold air circling my ankles like something alive, something watching. The note still trembled in my hand, its sharp handwriting cutting deeper with every second I stared at it. Bora Bora, a family trip. 3 seats confirmed. The silence in the house wasn't just absence, it was intention. It was planning. It was escape. But the worst part wasn't the emptiness, it was how familiar it felt. I set the note down slowly, like it might burn through the table if I dropped it too fast. My fingers brushed against the glass paperweight, and the chill of it jolted me into motion. I crossed the living room, each step echoing in a space that used to be loud, too loud with voices that somehow never heard me. My chest tightened as I looked around. Without decorations, without stray blankets, without Morgan's discarded shoes, the place didn't just look empty. It looked staged, erased, like someone wanted to scrub any trace of life or my place in it before leaving. The tree was gone, the garland was gone. Even the cheap glittery banner we hung every year without fail simply wasn't there. It was as if New Year's had never happened at all. A faint scent of lavender cleaner hung in the air, stronger now that I noticed it. I walked toward the kitchen, the cold tile biting into my bare feet. The countertops gleamed, every surface shone. They had cleaned before abandoning me. Not parents in a rush, not a family running late, but a coordinated exit. I reached out, touching the stainless steel refrigerator. My reflection warped slightly on the door, a pale ghost of myself with tired eyes and an expression I couldn't quite name. When I pulled it open, the hollowness inside hit me harder than it should have. No leftover roast, no cider, no breakfast ingredients, just cold shelves and a single bottle of water. They had cleared out their food, their things, their mess. They had removed any signs that they ever lived here. Except me. I shut the door gently, afraid. If I slammed it, I might shatter into pieces along with it. The dishwasher was empty. The sink spotless. Even the trash bin had a fresh liner. I went upstairs again, needing proof, any proof that I wasn't losing my mind. My parents' bedroom looked like a hotel room between guests. Bed perfectly made. Dresser top bare except for a single charging cable. The closet hung half empty. My mother's perfumes were gone, the little ceramic dish she used for her rings missing. My father's running shoes, always tossed carelessly near the bathroom, weren't there. This wasn't forgetfulness, it was orchestration. A soft hum filled the hallway, and it took me a moment to realize it was coming from Morgan's old speaker in her room. The kind she always left plugged in. I stepped inside slowly. Her bed was made a miracle in itself. Her desk, normally cluttered with makeup clothes and half-finished sketches, was cleared except for one small crumpled paper. I moved closer. Packing list. Bora, swimsuits, charger, beach dresses, medicine camera, 3 seats only. There it was again. The number 3. My throat went tight. That phrasing wasn't an oversight. It wasn't sloppy wording. It was definitive, intentional. They had planned seating without me from the beginning. I moved toward her closet. Half of her wardrobe was missing her favorite dresses, beach outfits, hats she only wore on vacation. The remaining hangers swung gently, as if disturbed recently. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. Why, the word left my lips in a whisper, barely audible even to myself. I turned away, but something under the bed caught my eye, a small silver hair clip I'd lent Morgan last week. She never gave things back unless Mom told her to. I bent to pick it up, and as I did, I spotted my own handwriting on something shoved farther back. A sticky note. The one I left on the counter reminding Morgan to pick up her dry cleaning, crumpled and shoved beneath her bed like trash. The ache in my chest pulsed harder now. By the time I stepped back into the hallway, my heart was moving too fast. Something tugged at me, a pull I couldn't ignore, and I found myself walking into my own room. At first glance, nothing seemed disturbed. The comforter was tossed aside, a pillow on the floor where I must have kicked it off in my sleep, but the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The drawer of my nightstand was slightly open, my jewelry box latch undone. A faint indentation next to it, like someone's hand had rested there. I opened the drawer fully. My phone charger, lotion, a notebook, and the empty place where my passport should have been. I froze. My passport was gone. Heat rose in my chest, a different kind of heartbeat, sharp, quick, furious. Not because of the passport itself, but because they had gone into my room. They had touched my things. They had made decisions about my life without me, over me, around me, through me. They had ensured I couldn't show up at the airport. They had made sure I would stay behind. I stood up abruptly, the room tilting slightly as I tried to breathe. I grabbed the edge of my desk, grounding myself. The desk was slightly shifted, just an inch or two. I never left it uneven. I opened the drawers, my old journals, receipts, a half-finished painting untouched. But my spare car keys weren't in the little tray. I dug deeper. Empty. A hollow laugh escaped me. Not the kind that comes from humor, but the kind that escapes when everything suddenly clicks into a shape you don't want to see. They wanted to remove any possibility of me chasing them. I backed away slowly, gripping the desk, then turned and walked downstairs again. The house felt colder now, the silence heavier, not emptiness but absence, not oversight but exclusion. I walked past the dining table, past the note, past the paperweight that looked suddenly sinister in its stillness. I went to the front door and opened it again. Mrs. Lopez was still on her porch, her robe wrapped tight. She raised a hand hesitantly. "They left very early," she said. "Suitcases and everything. I thought you'd already gone. I didn't see your car move." I managed a tight, brittle smile. "I didn't go." "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice cracked just a little, as if she'd understood something I hadn't yet allowed myself to say aloud. I closed the door gently behind me and leaned against it, letting the weight of everything settle over me. The house around me felt like a stranger, like a carefully constructed set designed to make me feel small or invisible or both. I pressed my forehead against the wood. My eyes stung, but the tears didn't fall. Not yet. Something else rose first, something sharper, steadier. Recognition. Understanding. This wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a mistake. It was the final expression of a truth I had pushed away for years. I stepped back from the door, breathing in the cold, stale air. And for the first time that morning, the words came out steady, without shaking, without doubt. "They didn't forget me," I whispered. "They left me, and that truth didn't break me, it woke me." I stood in the center of the deserted living room long enough for the cold to seep into my bones. The note, the empty fridge, the missing passport, they kept looping in my mind like a cruel movie trailer. But it wasn't until I really looked around the room, really let my eyes take in every corner, that a different kind of realization settled in. Something else was missing. Not just my family. Not just their shoes or their suitcases. The photos. I walked toward the wall where our last Christmas portrait should have been the one we took just 2 weeks earlier. All of us bundled in matching sweaters my mom insisted on buying. The nail was still there, a small silver pin sticking out like a tooth. But the frame was gone. That wasn't unusual, I told myself. Maybe they packed it for the trip. But then I noticed the faint dust outline where the frame had hung, a perfect rectangle marking its absence. I turned, scanning the room. Every framed picture that included me was missing. The one from my graduation. The one from that road trip when I was 17. Even the family photo from the 4th of July barbecue years ago. It wasn't a mistake. They had taken them down. I walked slowly through the house, my steps growing heavier with each missing frame. Down the hallway, empty hooks. In the dining room, the collage wall stripped bare. In the den, only a photo of Morgan with my parents remained, smiling broadly beneath twinkling holiday lights. My throat tightened. I wasn't just forgotten, I had been erased. I moved into the kitchen and pressed my palms against the countertop, grounding myself. The granite felt cold beneath my fingers, but it steadied me enough to breathe again. This wasn't the first time I felt erased in this house. It was simply the first time they'd done it physically. I inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. The air tasted like bleach and betrayal. My phone was charging on the counter. I reached for it and opened the Ring app, my thumb trembling slightly, not from fear but anticipation. My family thought I slept like a stone. They thought I wouldn't see them leave. But they forgot one thing. The camera never sleeps. When the footage loaded, a blue spinning circle mocked me for a moment before the video snapped into focus. The timestamp, 2:07 a.m. There they were. My mother lowering her oversized duffel bag onto the porch with the same cautious quiet she used when sneaking out of my room after checking if I was asleep as a child. My father shifting his weight nervously, glancing over his shoulder toward the dark windows. And Morgan, hood up, earbuds in, practically bouncing in place. I pressed play. "Come on," my father whispered, his voice barely audible. "We have to go before she wakes up." The words hit me sharper than I expected. My mother shot him a warning look, her finger to her lips. "Keep your voice down." Morgan rolled her eyes so dramatically it was visible even in the grainy night vision. "Relax. Lena sleeps like a rock. She won't know until we're already in LAX." They all laughed quietly, but enough. Enough for me to feel it like a punch. I rewound the scene and watched again. And again. Each time something new revealed itself. The way my mom's eyes flicked toward the door, worry tightening her jaw. The way my dad rushed, almost panicked. The way Morgan seemed thrilled to leave, as if it were some secret adventure. At one point, Morgan paused, reached into her tote bag and pulled something out. A small photo frame. My stomach lurched. It was the picture from my high school graduation, one of the only photos where I remember my dad genuinely smiling at me. She popped open the back of the frame, removed the photo inside, let it flutter into the bushes, and shoved the empty frame back into her bag. My breath left my lungs. My mother noticed and muttered, "Sophie, leave that." "It's fine," Morgan said breezily. "I don't want her in any of the pictures we bring." No one objected. They kept walking. My hands tightened around the phone. My heartbeat wasn't panicked anymore, it was steady. Too steady. A kind of quiet, cold clarity filling me from the inside out. I felt an unfamiliar calm settle across my shoulders like a heavy coat. If they didn't want to carry me into their new year, then they didn't deserve to carry anything of mine into it either. I set the phone down gently on the table. No shaking, no tears, just truth. I stood in the living room and scanned the space again, noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years. The sofa, I bought it. The coffee table, I picked it out. The rug, they asked me to order it when my mother said she didn't understand online reviews. The lamp in the corner, I found it at a flea market, sanded it, rewired it myself. The house was filled with pieces of me, pieces they never thanked me for. Pieces they assumed belonged to them. My chest warmed with something like recognition, like finally seeing a reflection I hadn't known was mine. I walked to the next room. The dining table mine, the matching chairs mine, the hutch mine. Every kitchen appliance except the toaster mine. I moved down the hallway. The washer, the dryer mine. Mine. Morgan's vanity mirror mine. Her desk chair mine. I stepped into the guest room. The bed frame mine. The mattress mine. The nightstand mine. My fingers brushed the oak wood of the dresser, tracing the grain. Every item had a memory, most of them small, unnoticed moments where I had said yes while they said nothing. My parents never liked shopping. They never liked assembling furniture. They always pushed the responsibility to me. Lena, you have better taste. Lena, you're better at choosing things. Lena, can you order this? It's confusing. Lena, we'll pay you back later. Later never came. Because later was never meant to. I moved back into the hallway and felt something tug at me again, this time sharper. I returned to my room, opened the drawer where I kept my papers, and found the folder I'd almost forgotten. A blue expanding folder bursting with receipts. I pulled it out and sat on my bed. The folder was heavier than I remembered. I unfastened the elastic band, and dozens of papers spilled out onto the comforter. Appliance receipts, furniture invoices, order confirmations, warranties in my name, credit card statements. I began sorting them slowly, methodically. Fridge purchased with my credit card. Washer, my bonus check paid for that. Dryer, same. Desk, my online order. Couch, my delivery. Dining, set, my investment. The truth became impossible to ignore. I owned almost everything in this house. My breath trembled, but not from fear. From clarity. From the kind of realization that feels like something inside your chest shifting into alignment for the first time. I sat back, letting the papers surround me like a story I had written without knowing it. A story they had taken for granted. A story I could reclaim. Downstairs, the house remained cold and empty, but upstairs on my bed I felt a small ember of warmth ignite. Not vindictiveness, not rage, just truth. I stood, gathered the receipts into a neat stack, tucked them back into the blue folder, and held it against my chest. If they wanted a family trip without me, then they could return to a family house without me too. The heater hummed faintly in the distance, kicking back on after hours of silence. The sound filled the house in a way that made my decision feel final, rooted, real. I whispered into the stillness, the words steady as a vow. If they didn't want me on their trip, they won't want what comes next. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt awake. I carried the blue folder downstairs like it was something alive, something that hummed with a truth I had ignored for too long. The weight of it wasn't paper, it was 28 years of being useful, reliable, and visible. I set it on the kitchen table, the same table my mother once claimed she had picked out, even though it was my receipt tucked inside this folder that proved otherwise. The house felt colder now that I understood exactly how empty it really was. Not just empty of people, but empty of loyalty, empty of honesty, empty of the kind of love I had pretended existed. I sat down, opened the folder again, and spread the receipts across the table one by one, organizing them in careful rows. My mother always said I kept too much paperwork, always teased me for filing things away like an anxious librarian. But now, as each receipt landed in its place, I felt something tighten and snap into clarity. Living room, dining room, kitchen, laundry, bedrooms, garage. Every section of the house I had once labored to maintain now sat before me, documented, itemized, and undeniably mine. I picked up the first sheet, the stainless steel refrigerator. I remembered my dad groaning about the old one breaking again, complaining loudly, until I finally said, "Fine, I'll just buy the new one." He didn't resist. He rarely resisted when it came to me footing the bill. Next, the washer and dryer. I had bought them after my mother spent weeks sighing dramatically about laundromats being unsafe and how they were too busy to deal with constant repairs. I had offered to contribute, and somehow that had turned into me paying for everything while they promised, laughed, even that they'd reimburse me when taxes came in. The reimbursement never came. I stared at the neat black print on the invoice. My name, my bank, my responsibility. My breath trembled, but my hands didn't. For once they were steady. I pushed the receipts aside and stood. Something in me needed to move, needed to see. I walked down the hallway, every step echoing through the hollow house. I started in the dining room. The hutch in the corner mine. I pulled open the drawers. Empty. They had even taken the placemats out though. The drawer dividers I'd bought were still inside. I moved to the living room. The lamp by the couch had a faint fingerprint smudge on the base. I had wiped that lamp down every week. The couch itself, a soft gray sectional, still held the faint scent of the lavender spray I used when I cleaned. My mother always insisted the couch was too bland, but she never offered to replace it. Because I did. I ran my hand along the back of it. The fabric was cool under my fingertips, and I pressed a little harder, grounding myself. Every item I touched felt different now. Not memories, not shared belongings, but proof, evidence. Ownership. I crossed into the den where my father kept his fishing gear stacked in the corner. The gear was gone now, but the desk I had assembled for him still remained. I remembered the night he bought it, or rather the night I bought it under the pretense that he'd pay me back eventually. He had stood over me as I tightened each screw, not offering help, just watching as if it were my job. My jaw clenched. I stepped back, smoothing my hands down my sides. I didn't want to be angry. Not yet. Anger could come later. I wanted clarity first. I moved to the stairs and went up slowly, feeling the wood creak under my bare feet. In the hallway, the absence of family photos hit me again. Dust outlines where my face used to be, places where frames had been removed in the dark. I reached out, brushing my fingers along one empty spot, the faint, chalky residue clinging to my skin. They had erased me long before they left. I walked into my parents' room, next, driven by an instinct I didn't fully understand. Their suitcases were gone, drawers half open, a stamp of hurried packing left behind like a signature. The comforter lay perfectly smoothed, as though someone had pressed it down right before leaving. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside were little scraps of paper tucked beneath a book. Receipts, notes, a balled-up tissue, and at the bottom, a folded sheet with my mother's handwriting. Packing checklist: passport, sunscreen, sunglasses, Morgan's inhaler, flight snacks, check if Lena is asleep. Do not wake her. A wave of heat rose up my neck. I had seen enough. I folded the note carefully, not because it deserved care, but because I wanted it intact. Then I walked into Morgan's room. The vanity looked bare without her makeup collection sprawled across it. The mirror I bought her for her 17th birthday, a night she didn't thank me for, still hung on the wall. I hesitated before touching it. Was it worth it? I whispered into the empty room. No answer came. Just the cold hum of silence. I turned to her desk. One drawer hung slightly open. I nudged it. Inside were random papers, old receipts, gum wrappers. Nothing of value. Except at the bottom, a birthday card envelope with my name on it. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted it. I opened the flap. Inside was a card with a glittery front. Happy birthday to you, generic and cheap. I opened it. Blank. Not signed. Not written in. A receipt fell outdated nearly a year ago. It had never been given to me. I held the card for a long moment, then set it down gently. Not out of sadness. Out of understanding. Some people didn't forget to love you, they simply never intended to. I walked back down the hallway and felt the house shift around me, not physically but in meaning. This wasn't a home that had abandoned me. It was a structure I'd been living inside while convinced I belonged. The truth was simpler, cleaner, sharper. I had belonged nowhere in it. Not really, not ever. I went downstairs again and found myself drawn toward the sliding back door. I pulled it open. The cold hit me instantly, stealing my breath for a moment. The backyard looked lonely and brittle, the winter air turning the grass pale. I stepped out onto the porch and hugged my arms around myself, staring at the patch of frost-covered lawn where we used to grill in the summer. We used to pretend we were a family here. Pretend being the key word. I closed the door and returned to the kitchen. The paperweight gleamed on the table like a small glass lie holding down a note that had changed everything. I sat down again, my breath fogging faintly, as if the house was already forgetting how to hold warmth. They had left me. They had erased me. They had gone through my belongings. They had taken my passport. They had taken down every photo that showed me as part of them. And somehow the clarity of all that made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. In control. Not of them. Of myself. I reached for the blue folder, pulled it close, and whispered the truth out loud, letting it settle in the air, letting it become real. If this house was never mine, then I don't owe it anything. The silence didn't argue. It agreed. I sat at the kitchen table with the blue folder open in front of me, the papers splayed across the surface like a map of every moment I'd been the quiet backbone of this family. The morning light hit the receipts at an angle that made the ink shine, each line a reminder of the money I'd spent, the promises they'd made, the gratitude they'd never offered. For a moment, I just stared. Then I reached out, steady this time, and pulled the first receipt closer. The refrigerator. Over $1,000 charged to my card. I remembered the day my dad complained about the old one breaking loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I also remembered how fast he'd agreed when I offered to handle it. If it's easier for you, he'd said, handing me the tape measure without meeting my eyes. It wasn't for me. But of course that never mattered. I reached for another sheet. The washer and dryer set, brand new, efficient, expensive. I had spent weeks listening to my mother sigh theatrically about the laundromat being unsafe, about having no time, until I finally caved and bought the set myself. She hugged me afterward, but it wasn't gratitude. It was relief. Relief that she didn't have to deal with it anymore. I kept sorting. Every page added weight to a truth that settled deeper into my chest. The living room set mine. The dining set mine. The kitchenware mine. Most of Morgan's room mine. Even things I didn't remember paying for were suddenly glaring at me in print. And then, when I least expected it, I found something that made me sit up straighter. A handwritten note in my mother's cursive, folded neatly and tucked behind an appliance warranty. It read, "Lena will order washer, dryer on her card. Reimburse later. Remember after taxes. Reimburse later." It almost made me laugh. They hadn't forgotten. They had simply counted on me not asking. I set the note aside, pulled the folder even closer, and kept digging. The more I flipped, the clearer the pattern became. They used my money for repairs, for upgrades, for holidays. They leaned on me because I never pushed back, never asked questions. I was the safety net they never acknowledged, the card they relied on, the wallet they liked to pretend was theirs. I took a slow, steady breath. This was more than forgetting me on a trip. This was years of dependence dressed up as love. My phone vibrated on the table. For a split second, I thought it might be one of them, but the screen showed something different, a notification from my bank. A completed transaction. An automatic transfer. My brows furrowed. I hadn't set up any auto payments since quitting the family home. I tapped the notification open. Electric bill. Paid from my account. A cold wave rolled through me. I scrolled further. Water bill. Gas bill. All paid from my account. The bills for a house I no longer lived in had been linked to my bank. Somehow, sometime in the past several months, they had set it up using my information. I vaguely remembered signing something during tax season when my dad told me he needed my signature just for verification. My stomach nodded. They had planned that too. I reached for the phone again, and this time I opened the banking app. The charges were clear, undeniable proof of financial manipulation. My fingers tightened around the edges of the phone, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. I turned back to the receipts. If they wanted to treat me like a bank, then I had every right to close my branch. I organized the documents, grouping them by room. I wrote lists item by item, price by price. The numbers grew into the thousands, a mountain of hidden labor and financial sacrifice. And as I worked, memories surfaced, some small, some sharp enough to sting. I remembered the time Morgan wanted new stage lights for her dance video. My parents told her no because we can't afford extras. She ran to her room crying, slamming doors dramatically. An hour later, my mother handed me an Amazon wish list and whispered, "Could you, just this once? She's been under so much stress." I had bought it. All of it. I remembered the time my dad forgot to pay the electric bill and we nearly lost power. He called me at work, angry, frantic, and demanded I fix it because he was too busy to deal with this nonsense. I paid the overdue balance before lunch. I remembered the time they asked me to buy a mattress because theirs was ruining their backs. They never paid me back for that either. I set the pen down and rubbed my temples. The memories didn't hurt. Not anymore. They simply lined up like evidence in a trial I had never realized I'd been preparing for. My eyes drifted to the window. Outside, the yard was barren, frosted, lifeless. I watched a few dry leaves push across the concrete, and something in my chest shifted. I stood up, walked into the living room, and looked around again. Really looked. The couch, I bought that. The coffee table, I built it. The rug, I ordered it. The lamp, I restored it. The bookshelf, I paid for it. The television, I installed it. Every part of this house depended on me. Every inch of comfort, convenience, and cleanliness had been carved from my time, my money, my effort. I whispered into the quiet air, "You don't get to take from me and leave me behind." My voice didn't crack. It didn't shake. It felt steady, final. I walked back to the table, picked up the pen again, and wrote at the top of a blank page, "Items I own." The list grew fast. Couch, coffee table, bookshelf, TV. Dining table, chairs. Rug, lamp, fridge. Washer, dryer, kitchen appliances. Vanity desk chair. Patio set. The line kept going, leaving little empty space on the page. When the last item was listed, I sat back. This wasn't petty. This wasn't revenge. This was reclaiming what was mine. The blue folder sat beside me like an ally, each receipt a piece of truth they couldn't rewrite. They had left me behind without hesitation, erasing me from their photos, planning their trip without me sneaking out in the middle of the night. But they had forgotten something. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the one who stayed quiet. I wasn't the one who accepted scraps of affection. I gathered the papers, stacked them neatly, and exhaled. Then I picked up my phone and opened the browser, moving companies near me. Dozens of names appeared. I scrolled until one caught my eye: Northwest Premier Movers, family-owned, highly rated. Reviews describing them as respectful, careful, reliable. Reliable. A word that once felt like a chain now felt like a tool I could use for myself. I pressed call. Northwest Premier Movers. A man answered, his voice warm and professional. "This is Jacob. How can I help you?" I inhaled deeply, the kind of breath that comes before a decision that changes everything. "I need to schedule a move," I said. "As soon as possible." "Sure thing," he said. "How much are we moving?" I glanced at my list. At the receipts. At the cold, empty house that had never really been mine. "A lot," I replied. "Most of it, actually." He hesitated, surprised. "We can be there in 3 days. I'll take it." After we hung up, I closed the blue folder and placed it at the center of the table. Everything inside it was mine. Everything they took advantage of was mine. And now everything I was about to take back, that was mine too. I whispered the truth into the silent kitchen, a vow forming in my chest, like something ancient and sure. If they didn't want me with them, they won't want what comes next. I woke before the sun, long before the world outside had warmed or stretched into the new day. For a moment, the silence felt familiar, that same hollow quiet from New Year's morning, but it no longer scared me. It no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like a beginning. A stillness before something shifts. I sat up slowly, letting the cold air brush against my skin. My body felt strangely calm, steady in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The blue folder sat on my nightstand like a guardian, a reminder of everything I had uncovered, everything I had claimed. Downstairs, the house waited in its eerie emptiness. I didn't turn on any lights. I wanted to feel the quiet fully. I moved through the shadows, made myself a simple cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the blue folder open in front of me. 3 days had passed since I'd called the movers. 3 days of clarity building, like a slow, certain tide. At 7:58 a.m., I heard the rumble of a truck pulling into the driveway. I smoothed my sweater, and walked to the front door. A large white truck sat in the driveway, the blue lettering shining in the weak morning light, Northwest Premier Movers. Right on time, I opened the door before they had a chance to knock. A tall man with sandy hair stepped forward and offered a warm smile. "Morning, I'm Jacob." Behind him stood 2 movers, Marcus stocky with a trimmed beard, and Tyler younger polite, holding a clipboard like it was a fragile artifact. "Come in," I said. "There's coffee if you'd like." They exchanged surprised glances. People rarely greeted movers with warmth at 8 in the morning, I guess, but they stepped inside, gratefully wiping their boots. As they drank their coffee, I pulled the blue folder from the counter and handed it to Jacob. "This is everything we're moving today. The receipts are inside for each item." Jacob flipped through a few pages, brows lifting in something like impressed disbelief. "This is very organized. It needed to be." He looked at me with something like understanding, then snapped the folder shut. "All right, we'll start in the living room." The words felt like a hinge swinging open. A shift, a breath. I stepped back, letting them pass. The living room, usually filled with clutter, noise, tension, felt like a blank stage. The movers examined each item, cross-checking with the list. "The TV first," Jacob said. "Wrap it in the thick blankets." I watched as they swaddled the television in layers of padding, securing each corner with gentle precision. I remembered the night I bought it, the way my father bragged about his new smart TV to his friends, as if he'd spent the money himself. I remembered sitting on the couch beside Morgan as she scrolled through channels, never once acknowledging I'd worked overtime shifts to afford it. Now watching it leave this house felt like reclaiming a piece of my own story. Marcus and Tyler lifted the couch next. The cream-colored sectional that my mother adored, the one she insisted would class up the living room. She had shown it off to guests, saying she'd finally found the perfect centerpiece. But it was my receipt in the folder. As they maneuvered the couch through the doorway, something inside me untangled. The coffee table went next. The rug. The end tables. Piece by piece, the home I had built with my hands, my effort began to leave the house that had never treated me like I belonged. When they reached the kitchen, Tyler turned to me with a hesitant expression. "Everything in here too?" "Yes," I said without hesitation, "all of it." They began to pack the blender, the toaster oven, the air fryer, the pots and pans, the mixing bowls. Every appliance I had bought because my mother mentioned wanting one. Every tool that had instantly become my responsibility the moment it entered the house. Under the blender, something caught my eye. A small envelope slightly torn at the edge, tucked behind the appliance. I picked it up. My name was written on the front. Inside was a grocery list, my mother's handwriting in neat lines. Olive oil, Lena. Buy chicken thighs, too expensive. Have Lena get organic fruit for Morgan. Coffee beans. Use Lena's card. The tiny sting behind my ribs wasn't pain, it was confirmation. I folded the note carefully and set it aside. Proof wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was as small as a grocery list written in a language of entitlement. By noon, the kitchen was stripped. When the movers headed to the laundry room, Marcus paused at the washer and dryer. "This is a nice set," he said. "Hardly used." "They didn't use it much," I said quietly. "But I paid for it." He nodded, not prying, just understanding. Once the appliances were wheeled out, I walked upstairs, directing them toward Morgan's room. The vanity I'd bought for her birthday. The lamp she used every night. The desk chair I'd purchased because my parents couldn't afford extras. As they unplugged the vanity mirror, something crunched beneath Tyler's foot. "Sorry, didn't see that," he said, picking up a crumpled envelope. "My name, my birthday." I opened it. A blank card inside. Another birthday forgotten. Another gift never given. I placed it into my pocket without a word. My parents' room was next. The humidifier, the reading lamp, the mattress I had paid for when my father complained about back pain. I opened their nightstand drawer out of instinct and found the packing checklist I'd seen before. "Check if Lena is asleep, do not wake her." 3 seats confirmed. The same words, the same truth. By mid-afternoon, the house looked skeletal. The walls echoed when I walked through the rooms. The kitchen counters gleamed empty. The living room felt like an abandoned stage after the actors had fled. Jacob approached me with the clipboard. "We're just about finished," he said. "Do you want to do a final walkthrough?" I nodded. We moved through the house together, room by room. With each step, something inside me lightened, something loosened. When we reached the kitchen, I walked to the table and picked up the Bora Bora note. I folded it neatly, set it in the center. Beside it, I placed the stack of overdue bills I'd found earlier. And finally, my house keys tied with a small satin ribbon. A parting gesture. A clean conclusion. Outside, the cold air wrapped around me like something new, not harsh but clear. The moving truck was packed. My car waited. Jacob leaned out the truck window. "Where to?" I gave him the address. "My new apartment. My new beginning. My space." He nodded. "We'll follow you." As I climbed into my car, I took one last look at the house in the rearview mirror. It stood quiet, hollow, a place that had taken so much from me, but had never offered shelter. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel guilt. I felt release. And as I pulled away from the curb, the house grew smaller and smaller in the mirror until it vanished behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was already moving forward. I had just finished unpacking a box of dishes when my phone lit up on the counter, buzzing so hard it wobbled against the granite. At first I ignored it. After the move, all I wanted was silence, the kind that wasn't hollow or cold, but warm and chosen. When it buzzed again, I recognized the notification tone. My Ring camera. My stomach tightened, not with dread, but with a strange, steady anticipation. The movers had left hours ago. No one should have been anywhere near the old house. I walked toward the phone, wiped my hands on a towel, and opened the app. The screen loaded slowly, and when the footage finally came into focus, I saw exactly what I expected. My family was home. The timestamp read 3:42 p.m. My mother stepped onto the porch, first tugging her overstuffed suitcase behind her. Her hair was frizzy from travel, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Behind her came my father, adjusting his neck pillow, grouchy, even after 10 days in paradise. Morgan trailed last, sunburned and scrolling through her phone, dragging a floral suitcase covered in stickers. They looked tired, tan, and completely unprepared for the new world waiting inside. I turned up the volume. My mother twisted the front doorknob and pushed it open with her hip, the way she always did when her hands were full. The sound that came out of her wasn't a scream. It wasn't even a gasp. It was a soft, strangled noise like disbelief caught in her throat. She dropped her suitcase. It toppled sideways with a thud. "What the hell?" my father muttered as he stepped in behind her. His voice disappeared into the empty living room. From the camera angle, I watched all three of them freeze in the doorway like figures trapped in a photograph. For a moment, silence filled the screen. Then Morgan's voice cracked the air. "Where's the couch?" She spun toward my mother. "Where's everything?" My mother stumbled forward, her hand pressed against her chest. "No, no, no." My father hurried deeper into the living room, out of frame. Seconds later, he reappeared, frantic. "The TV is gone," he barked. "The tables are gone. Lena's room, everything's gone. The house is empty." Morgan clutched her head dramatically. "My vanity, my desk, my mirror, who would take my stuff?" It was almost funny. They weren't asking about me. They weren't afraid for me. They weren't even concerned that I might have been hurt. All of their panic was about the things, the belongings, the items, not the daughter who had lived in that house. I leaned back against the counter and watched them spin in circles, darting from room to room, opening cabinets, checking closets, shouting over one another. My mother grabbed her phone, nearly dropping it twice before she managed to dial. "Hello," she panted. Yes, I'd like to report a robbery. Our entire house has been emptied. Everything is gone." I had to cover my mouth to stop the small, humorless laugh that escaped. My father stormed outside and paced across the driveway, his voice raised and tight. "How did someone get in? How did someone take all of this? This is insane." Morgan stomped onto the porch, her face flushed and furious. "This is why I said we shouldn't leave for 10 days, Mom. I told you." My mother ignored her. She was already on the verge of tears. But then something unexpected happened. One of the police officers arrived earlier than they expected. The Ring camera caught the moment he stepped onto the porch. He greeted them, calmly introduced himself, and stepped inside. I watched as they led him from room to room. Even without sound, their desperation was palpable. Then the audio clicked in again. The officer's voice was calm, professional. "Do you have receipts for the missing items?" My father stopped mid-rant. "Receipts? Yes," the officer said. "To confirm ownership." My mother stuttered. No, they were just in our house, so they're ours." The officer made a note. His silence said everything. Morgan dramatically threw her arms into the air. "Well, obviously, Lena knows something. She's weird, she collects receipts, she probably..." I paused the video. There it was. The deflection. The blaming. The instant attempt to turn me into the villain before they even asked if I was alive. They weren't worried about me. They weren't confused about the situation. They were angry that their free labor, free money, and free comfort had disappeared. I hit play again. My mother pulled the officer aside quietly, but not quietly enough for the camera. "I think our daughter might have done this," she whispered. "Done what?" the officer asked. "Taken everything. Does she have a key?" "Well, yes, but she wouldn't." She stopped herself. Even she knew how flimsy that sounded. My father jumped in. "She's been acting distant, ungrateful. She probably did this to get attention." "Attention," the officer repeated. "Yes," my mother said. "She always overreacts. She's very emotional." I flinched, not from hurt but from recognition. That sentence had shaped most of my childhood. She's emotional. She's dramatic. She's too sensitive. When you tell a child their feelings are exaggerated, they grow up believing their pain is imaginary. But not today. The officer scribbled something in his notebook. "We'll need to follow up with your daughter." "Good," my father snapped. "She needs to explain herself." Morgan suddenly pointed at the TV wall. She even took the remote. I stopped the video again and shook my head, unable to stop the small huff of laughter. I hadn't taken the remote. The movers had packed it in a box with the TV. But the outrage in her voice made it sound like I'd stolen her identity. I resumed the footage. Another officer arrived. More questions, more frantic answers. My parents' faces twisted with confusion and panic. but the more they spoke, the more obvious it became to the officers. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered windows, nothing missing that didn't legally belong to me. Eventually, the officers exchanged a look that made my father's voice trail off. "This appears to be a civil matter," the older officer said. "Not a burglary." My mother's jaw dropped. "What do you mean? Everything removed from the home seems to belong to your daughter," the officer continued. "Unless you can produce receipts proving otherwise." "We don't keep receipts," my father said sharply. "That's unfortunate," the officer replied calmly. Morgan whispered loudly, "She's going to get away with this." I paused the video again. Get away with this, as if I had stolen from them. As if I had created harm instead of reclaiming what was mine. As if all those years of paying their bills, buying their furniture, covering their emergencies weren't enough. The irony tasted bitter, but the bitterness didn't belong to me this time. I played the last section of the footage. The police concluded their investigation, shook their heads sympathetically, and left the house. Then the real chaos began. My mother collapsed onto the floor and burst into tears. My father punched the side of the doorway hard enough to make the camera shake. Morgan stomped around like a furious toddler. And finally, my phone screen flooded with missed calls. 23 messages in 10 minutes. 27. 34. I didn't listen. Not yet. Instead, I locked my phone, leaned against my kitchen counter in my new apartment, and let the quiet settle around me like a soft, warm blanket. For the first time, their panic wasn't my problem. It was the consequence of their choices. I breathed deeply, closed my eyes, and whispered into the stillness. They didn't lose their things. They lost their hold on me. And that truth felt better than revenge. It felt like freedom. The knock came just after 10 in the morning, 3 firm, deliberate taps that didn't belong to a neighbor, a delivery driver, or anyone who showed up unannounced without purpose. I froze halfway between the kitchen and the living room, a mug of tea warming my hands. I set it down, carefully wiped my palms on my jeans, and approached the door. Before looking through the peephole, I already knew. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, one older, broad-shouldered, with a calm professionalism about him, and the other, younger, visibly alert, holding a small notebook in one hand. My heartbeat stayed steady. I opened the door. "Miss Lena Hart?" the older one asked. "Yes," I said. "Come in." They exchanged a brief look, surprised I wasn't panic defensive or cagey, but stepped inside, wiping their boots politely. My apartment was bright with morning light, the furniture arranged neatly, my reclaimed life unfolding quietly around us. It looked peaceful. It felt peaceful. The younger officer cleared his throat. "We're here regarding a report filed by your parents." I nodded once. I figured. The older officer removed his hat, tucking it under his arm. They stated that a significant amount of property was removed from the residence while they were away. They also indicated that you may have information. "I do," I said. The younger officer blinked, taken aback by the directness. The older officer asked, "Did you remove property from the home?" "Yes." Another pause. The younger one clicked his pen, ready to write. "Did you have permission to enter the house? I lived there my entire life." "I had a key." The older officer nodded once slowly. "And did you remove items that belonged to your parents?" "No," I answered calmly. "I removed only what belonged to me." I walked to the coffee table and picked up the blue folder. The sight of it gave me a strange, grounded confidence, like armor made of truth instead of steel. I handed it to the older officer. He opened it. The younger officer leaned over his shoulder, eyebrows rising with each page he saw. Receipts, order confirmations, warranties, credit statements, screenshots, everything organized, highlighted, documented, all major appliances. Officer Hale murmured, flipping, "Washer, dryer, refrigerator. All purchased by me," I said. He looked up. "This is incredibly thorough." "I keep good records," I replied. "It's one of the things they teased me for." Turns out it's helpful now. Officer Swanson continued flipping, pausing at each document, his expression shifting from neutral to impressed to something like pity, not for me, but for the people who had filed the complaint. And these, he tapped the corner of a page, are warranties under your name. Yes. So, the younger officer said carefully, you removed your own property. Yes. Officer Swanson placed the pages back into the folder, aligning them neatly. Your family indicated emotional distress, that they felt unsafe, that the removal caused hardship. I looked him in the eye. They left me behind on New Year's Day without telling me. They took my passport. They cleaned the house of any trace of me. They planned their trip without me, then called it a family vacation. Both officers stilled. I didn't retaliate, I went on. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't steal. I simply reclaimed the things I bought over the years. That's all. Officer Hale flipped one more page. His eyes widened. He found it. The Bora Bora pre-charge. The one that was charged to my card. He looked at me with disbelief. They used your card for their vacation. Yes, I said softly. They never told me. I never agreed. The older officer let out a slow breath. This changes things. Before he could continue, the hallway outside erupted with noise, footsteps. Several. Quick, stumbling, angry. Then voices. I knew too well. She has to be here. Just knock. You better hope she answers. Don't start, Morgan. The officers turned, and then the elevator dinged. The doors slid open. My family spilled out like a tidal wave, my mother red-faced and frantic, my father stiff with fury, Morgan vibrating with indignation, her hair still frizzy from humidity. The moment they saw me standing beside two police officers in my quiet new apartment, they froze. My mother's face crumpled. Lena, why didn't you answer? Why did you leave? The house, our house, everything is gone. Officer Hale stepped neatly between us. Ma'am, please keep your distance. My father jabbed a finger toward me. Officer, she stole from us. No, Officer Swanson said calmly. She didn't. We raised her. My mother snapped. She had everything, and she, Mrs. Hart, the officer said firmly, your daughter has provided extensive documentation proving she purchased all the items removed. My father sputtered. She bought them for us. Do you have receipts supporting that? The officer asked. My mother's mouth snapped shut. Morgan threw her hands in the air. She's manipulating you. She always manipulates people. She just wants attention. I stepped forward. I took what I paid for, nothing more. My mother's eyes filled with tears. How could you do this? You blindsided us. You blindsided me first, I said quietly. Morgan scoffed. Oh my God, this is why you weren't invited to Bora Bora. The hallway went silent. The officers turned sharply toward her. My parents stiffened. Morgan paled but lifted her chin stubbornly. Officer Swanson raised an eyebrow. You left for a family trip without her. My father glared at her. Morgan, no. Let's tell the truth for once, I said, my voice even. They left at 2 a.m. They took down every picture with me in it. They took my passport. They planned a clean escape. My mother shook her head, horrified, not by what they'd done, but by the fact that I said it out loud. Lena, how dare you? How dare I asked. All I've ever done is give, and you couldn't even give me honesty. Miss Hart, Officer Swanson said softly, looking at me not with pity but with respect. You're within your legal rights. This case is not criminal. It will be documented as a civil family dispute. He turned to my parents. You have no grounds for pressing charges. My father's face flushed purple. Morgan's jaw dropped open. My mother pressed a hand to her forehead, dizzy with humiliation. This is outrageous, my father began. No, Officer Swanson interrupted. What's outrageous is expecting your daughter to pay for your furniture, appliances, and household expenses, then accusing her of theft when she reclaims her own property. My mother whispered, She made us look like fools. Officer Hale nodded. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you did that on your own." The officers turned back to me. "If your family continues to contact you in a harassing manner, call us directly," Swanson said. "We will handle it." I nodded, thanking them. The officers walked out past my stunned family, leaving the hallway thick with silence. My mother reached for me weakly. "Lena, please, we should talk. We can work this out." I stepped back. "No, you don't get to ask for closeness now, not after everything." My father's voice was low, threatening. "This isn't over." I held his gaze. "For me it is." They stood there, three people who had always felt larger than life in my mind, now looking small, fragile, and strangely unfamiliar. The elevator doors opened again, the soft chime breaking the moment. My family stepped inside, still arguing, still blaming, still spiraling. I watched the doors close. The hallway grew quiet. I closed my apartment door, leaned my back against it, and breathed deeply. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a door closing behind me. And another opening. The certified letter was slipped under my apartment door like a thin white thread, quiet enough not to wake me, but deliberate enough to make sure I found it. I noticed it when I stepped out to make coffee, my slippers brushing the envelope forward across the floor. For a moment I just stared at it. The courthouse seal sat in the top corner like an accusation. I didn't pick it up right away. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and let the water warm, while the winter morning poured pale light across my counter. I needed a clear head. I needed steady hands. Only when the kettle clicked off did I finally return to the envelope, sliding a finger beneath the seal and unfolding the document inside. The words blurred for a second before sharpening into focus. Small Claims Court Summons. Plaintiffs Daniel Hart, Marianne Hart, Morgan Hart. Claim amount $12,000. Reason emotional distress, partial theft, intentional infliction of hardship. A slow breath left my chest. Not shaky, not panicked, just tired. After everything, after abandoning me on New Year's Day, after erasing me from the house, after using my card for their luxury Bora Bora trip, they were suing me. Not because they had a case, but because they had lost control. I placed the letter on the counter, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat at the table the movers had helped set up in my apartment. The steam curled upward in a soft spiral. I touched the rim of my mug and whispered, Of course they did. They couldn't punish me with guilt anymore. So they were trying to punish me with paper. I opened the blue folder, the one that had become my silent witness, my truth, my spine. I flipped through each receipt, each printed statement, each screenshot, each warranty. Every line reaffirmed what I already knew. There was nothing to fear, just preparation, just truth. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, Maria stood outside with a container of caldo and a raised eyebrow. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Not a ghost," I replied, handing her the summons. "Something much less supernatural." She scanned the first page, her face tightening with each line. "Emotional distress," she muttered. "Oh, please. Their lucky emotional distress isn't something you charge them for." A small laugh escaped me. The first real one in days. She set the letter down and placed both hands on my shoulders. "They want to fight because they think you're still the same girl who never said no. You're not, I know. You'll go," she said. "You'll show your truth. And they'll collapse under the weight of their own hypocrisy." I nodded. I believed her. Truly. 2 weeks passed in a steady rhythm. Work walks along the river with Maria, warm dinners, eaten alone but never lonely, quiet mornings with coffee and soft sunrise. The summons sat pinned to my refrigerator like a reminder, but not a threat. More like closure waiting in an envelope. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and gray, the kind of winter day where the world felt muted. I dressed simply: navy coat, black boots, hair pulled back. I looked in the mirror and saw someone calm, someone grounded, someone who didn't shrink anymore. I drove to the courthouse with the blue folder buckled into the passenger seat like a companion. The closer I got, the steadier my heartbeat became. Inside the courthouse, buzzed with quiet tension, whispered arguments, nervous couples, stiff lawyers clutching files. I found a seat in the back row of the waiting area. Minutes later they arrived. My parents walked in first, stiff and rehearsed. My father's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. My mother's face was pinched, her eyes red as though she had spent the morning crying. Or pretending to. Morgan trailed behind them, her arms crossed, her steps sharp with bitterness. They spotted me immediately. My mother whispered something frantically to my father. Morgan's eyes locked on mine, full of unfiltered anger. But I didn't look away. Our case was called within minutes. The courtroom was small, just a judge, 2 tables, and a scattering of wooden benches. The judge looked to be in his 50s, stern posture but kind eyes. He adjusted his glasses and glanced at the file. Case number 5112, he announced. Hart versus Hart. My parents moved to the plaintiff's table. I moved to the defendant's. Plaintiffs, the judge said, you may begin. My mother stood first. Your Honor, she began, voice trembling. With carefully practiced fragility, our daughter emptied our home without our knowledge. She removed furniture, appliances, belongings, everything. My father added quickly, we returned from a family vacation to find the house stripped bare. It has caused us significant emotional distress and financial hardship. Morgan leaned forward. She even took my vanity, my mirror, my desk things she bought for me. Gifts. The judge lifted a hand. Thank you. Please sit. He looked at me. Miss Hart, how do you respond? I stood. Your Honor, I removed only the items I purchased myself. I have full documentation. I walked to the bench and handed the blue folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He opened it. Silence stretched. First page, the refrigerator receipt. Next, washer and dryer invoice. Then the dining set, the sofa, the TV, the blender, warranties, order confirmations, bank statements, screenshots, photos. The judge's eyebrows rose higher with each page. He looked up. Miss Hart, this is extraordinarily organized. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I had a feeling it might be necessary someday. He turned to my parents. Do you have receipts showing you purchased any of these items? My father swallowed. Well, no, but. They were used by the household, my mother said desperately. That should count. The judge shook his head. Household use does not imply ownership. He turned back to the folder and flipped to the highlighted text showing the Bora Bora charge on my card. And this, he said, tapping the page, shows your daughter paid for part of your vacation. My parents stiffened. Morgan sputtered. She knew about that. She did. I met the judge's eyes. I did not. He nodded slowly. Based on the documentation, he said, closing the folder carefully, there is no evidence of theft. There is no evidence of wrongdoing. Miss Hart removed her own property. The court finds no grounds for damages, my mother gasped. Morgan dropped her jaw dramatically. My father's face twisted with rage. I exhaled a slow, steady breath. The judge lifted his gavel. Case dismissed. The sharp crack echoed through the courtroom. My parents stared at me like I had betrayed them. Morgan muttered under her breath, You'll regret this. I turned to her. I regretted staying long before I ever regretted leaving. I gathered the blue folder, nodded respectfully to the judge, and walked out of the courtroom into the cold December air. Snow had begun to fall, soft, quiet flakes drifting down like a curtain closing on the last act of a play. I stepped outside, letting a few flakes land in my hair, and whispered to myself, free. I woke the next morning with a feeling I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't fear or dread or the quiet anxiety that used to cling to me the way my mother's expectations did. It was lighter, warmer a feeling, with no sharp edges. When I rolled onto my side and saw the soft winter sun spilling across my bedroom floor, the name for that feeling finally came to me. Peace. Pure, uncomplicated peace. I stayed there for a moment, wrapped in the stillness, letting it sink into my bones. No footsteps outside my door. No voices calling my name for help. No demands. No guilt. No weight. Just breath. Just morning. Just me. I eventually pushed the blankets back and padded into the kitchen, the cold tiles grounding me in a way I hadn't felt grounded in years. My little apartment, my space, looked lived in now. A blanket draped over the couch, a half-read book on the side table, a candle by the window, a plant I probably wouldn't kill this time. I made myself coffee, the rich scent filling the air, and stepped out onto the balcony. The Willamette River shimmered quietly below its ripples, catching the sunlight like strands of silver. "I don't miss them," I whispered. "Not today. Not in this moment. Not at all." Saying it didn't hurt. It didn't feel defiant or bitter. It just felt true. I went back inside and noticed the sticky note I'd left on the dining table last night. "I choose peace." I smiled and pressed it onto the fridge. Then I started unpacking, slowly, intentionally. I wasn't rushing to clean for anyone. I wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply building a home piece by piece with hands that finally felt free. The first box held a lamp with a quirky shape, warm amber light, curved like a question mark. My mother had always hated it, claimed it clashed with her aesthetic, even though she rarely knew what she wanted unless someone else had it first. I placed the lamp on the side table and turned it on. The glow washed over the room, soft and golden. Perfect. Next, I hung artwork prints I'd collected over the years but never displayed because my family insisted I had odd taste. One by one, I lined them along the wall. They made the space feel vibrant, alive, full of pieces of myself I had tucked away for too long. As I worked, a knock sounded at the door. Maria. She stood there with a warm plate of sweet bread and a grin that made my chest loosen. "You shouldn't start your first peaceful weekend making your own breakfast," she said, pushing the plate into my hands. I laughed. "You are a dangerous woman. I can't resist free carbs." "Good," she said, stepping inside. "Because I made extra." We sat on my couch, drinking coffee and eating warm bread while talking about everything and nothing. Her latest book club drama, the woman downstairs who'd adopted a cat and then immediately adopted 2 more, the neighbor who decorated his balcony with 12 inflatable snowmen and called it subtle holiday cheer. Every detail felt nurturing in a way I'd never experienced in my childhood home. There was no competition, no manipulation, no emotional strings, just companionship, just ease. After Maria left with a promise to return later with empanadas, I slipped into a light jacket and decided to take a walk. The winter air nipped my cheeks, but it felt invigorating, not cruel. As I walked along the river path, I watched joggers pass by, couples holding hands, families taking morning strolls. I used to be the girl who watched other people live, wishing I could join them one day. Now, for the first time, I felt like I belonged to this world, not as a background character, not as a caretaker, but as a person. A whole separate person. At a small cafe on the corner, someone played soft jazz near the open door. The scent of vanilla and roasted beans drifted out, weaving through the cold air. I lingered there, listening, letting curiosity bloom in my chest. Not anxiety, not obligation. Curiosity. I noticed how foreign that feeling was, and yet how right it felt. By midday, I returned home with a paper bag holding a pastry and a small potted succulent I absolutely did not need, but desperately wanted. I placed the plant on my windowsill and stepped back to admire it. It looked like a tiny guardian with spiky arms and more confidence than it had any right to possess. I envied it a little. Then I laughed at myself. The rest of the afternoon passed in a comfortable rhythm, unpacking a box, humming to myself, rearranging books, warming leftovers for lunch, lighting the lamp again just because it made me feel settled. While sorting through another box, I found an old journal, worn blue cover, bent corners. When I opened it, I saw something I'd written in college on the very first page. "Make a life that feels like yours." I pressed my thumb against the words and inhaled sharply. That girl, the one who'd written those words, had been hopeful. She'd wanted a life she could call her own. She didn't know how to build it yet, but she had dreamed of it. And for the first time, I realized I was finally doing it. Hours later, as the sky shifted into lavender and pale gold, the softest knock brushed against my door. I opened it to find Louise from book club holding a glass bowl of cranberry orange sauce. "I made too much," she said, handing it over. "And I figured you shouldn't spend your weekend alone." I smiled and invited her in. She stayed for a half hour chatting about favorite authors and old movies. When she left, she hugged me soft and warm, the way a mother might hug a daughter if she loved without conditions. Later after dinner, I curled up on the couch with a blanket and let the quiet settle. Not empty, not cold, just quiet. The kind of quiet you get to choose. My phone buzzed. A new email, from Morgan. My breath stilled. I opened it. "Hey, I don't know how to say this. I'm sorry. I'm still figuring things out. Maybe we can talk someday. Only if you want to." Morgan, no manipulation. No insults. Just a confused 17-year-old trying to reach out. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things need time. 10 minutes later, another notification popped up, this time a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play. "Lena, it's Dad. We hope you're doing well. If you ever need anything, just let us know." His voice was tired, soft, uncertain. I wasn't ready to respond, but I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I saved the voicemail, not as a sign of reconciliation, not as hope, just as a marker of change. As night settled over the city, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and stepped onto the balcony. The lights shimmered across the water, cars whispered by. Somewhere, someone was laughing, and I felt whole. A life that felt like mine. I lifted the cup to my lips and whispered into the winter air. I didn't lose anything worth keeping. I gained everything I was missing. Winter settled over Portland in a way that felt almost gentle, muted skies, a soft hush over the river, a calm that matched the rhythm I was slowly learning to live in. I woke early on the first Sunday of January, with no plans, no obligations, no one calling my name from downstairs. The quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. I sat up in bed, stretched and listened. Nothing but the low hum of the heating unit and the distant call of a seagull drifting in from the river. I wasn't used to mornings like this. Unrushed, undemanding. Mine. I slipped on a cardigan and padded into the kitchen where my succulent greeted me from the windowsill like a tiny spiky cheerleader. I laughed softly at myself for feeling comforted by a plant, but in a way it felt like a small symbol of something steady. I made breakfast slowly, savoring every step, the crack of an egg, the sizzle of butter in the pan, the glow of my quirky amber lamp across the counter. The woman living in this apartment felt like a stranger compared to the girl who once tiptoed around her parents' house to avoid being in the way. After eating, I packed a small tote bag with my journal, a pen, and a worn paperback. It wasn't that I needed to leave the apartment, it was that I wanted to, a choice, not a necessity. The riverfront trail was brisk with winter air. The sky hung low and pale, but the cold became a kind of companion, sharp enough to wake me, fully gentle enough not to hurt. I walked past dog walkers, joggers, older couples bundled in scarves. Every passing smile felt like a reminder that life existed outside the world I had been trapped in for so long. Around midday, I stopped at a cafe with big windows and soft jazz playing from a corner speaker. I ordered chamomile tea and settled into a corner booth, opening my journal to a blank page. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Blank pages used to make me anxious. So much space, so much room for mistakes. Today, the emptiness felt like possibility. I started writing about nothing and everything. About the trial, about relief, about loneliness and healing, and the strange in-between space where forgiveness wasn't ready but bitterness was gone. About the quiet of my apartment. About the lightness of waking up alone and not feeling abandoned. Somewhere in the middle of a sentence, my phone buzzed. A text from Morgan. It was short, just a single line. Can we talk sometime this week? I stared at the screen, my emotions folding in on themselves. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even sad. I was thoughtful. She wasn't my enemy. She was a product of our parents. A girl who spent her whole life learning the wrong lessons. A girl who needed their approval as desperately as I once had. I typed back slowly. Maybe. Not yet. But maybe soon. I hit send and expected a barrage of messages. Instead, her reply came quietly, a minute later. Okay, I understand. I closed my phone, took a breath, and let the warmth of the cafe settle around me. Later that afternoon, I visited the local bookstore that Maria had recommended. It smelled like old paper and cinnamon, the kind of scent that made your shoulders drop and your pulse slow. I wandered through aisles of fiction poetry and cookbooks, stopping occasionally to run my fingertips across spines that caught my attention. A small hardcover journal with a navy fabric cover caught my eye. Embossed in gold lettering were the words, "A life of your own." Something in me clicked. I bought it. On my walk home, snowflakes began to fall, small weightless specks drifting down like something out of a movie. People around me pulled their jackets tighter, rushed toward warmth, but I slowed down. I wanted to feel every flake melt on my cheek. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, lit a candle, and curled up on the couch with a blanket. I opened the new journal and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then I sat and listened to the soft crackle of the candle. My old life had been loud demands, guilt, manipulation, constant background noise of responsibility. This life was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was intentional. Around 6, I heard a gentle knock. When I opened the door, Maria stood there holding a Tupperware full of still warm empanadas. "You can't live on toast and eggs," she said, stepping inside. I laughed. "I absolutely can," she smirked. "Then you'll die of boredom." We ate together at my tiny dining table, the glow from my quirky lamp washing the room in buttery light. Maria told me about her grown kids, her holiday trip, to see her sister, the neighbor's dog, who kept eating her tomato plants. When I told her about the text from Morgan, she nodded slowly. "Sometimes the youngest ones wake up first," she said. "Sometimes they notice the cracks sooner." "I don't know if I can forgive them," I admitted. "You don't have to." "Not today," she said gently. "But healing isn't only done facing forward. Sometimes you have to look back long enough to understand why you're walking away." Her words lodged somewhere deep. After she left, I brewed myself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the balcony again. The city lights shimmered across the river, scattering like spilled glitter. I leaned on the railing and let the cold air fill my lungs. For years, I believed healing meant fixing what was broken. But standing there, watching the snow fall softly over the water, I realized something different. Healing wasn't about repairing the old. It was about choosing the new. Choosing myself. Inside, my phone vibrated once. A voicemail. I listened. My mother's voice, soft and tentative. "Lena, your father and we don't know how to reach you right now. But we're trying. We're trying to understand. We hope you're warm. We hope you're okay." It didn't sound like manipulation. It didn't sound like anger. It sounded like loss. But I wasn't responsible for filling that loss anymore. I saved the voicemail quietly and set my phone down. Then I returned to my journal and wrote a single line: "I am beginning again." When I finally crawled into bed, the room felt warm, still, and mine. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and whispered into the dark. I didn't escape them. I found myself, and for the first time in my entire life, that felt like enough. New Year's Day returned like a gentle echo, 1 year after the morning that had shattered everything I thought I knew about family. But this time I woke in a bed that felt warm, in a room that felt like mine, to a silence that wasn't cruel, it was comforting. The sunlight stretched across my floor in soft gold, and for a long moment I stayed still, letting the memory of last year drift through my mind like a distant nightmare. The empty house, the cold kitchen, the note on the table. The realization that I had been deliberately left behind. But the ache that once accompanied those memories wasn't there anymore. Not today. I rose slowly, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet as I padded to the kitchen. My plant, stubborn and thriving, leaned toward the sun like it had survived something too. Maybe it had. Maybe we both had. I brewed coffee, the rich scent filling the small space, and stepped out onto the balcony. The Willamette River shimmered below, peaceful and blue, carrying winter light across its surface. I wrapped my sweater tighter and breathed in the crisp morning air. This year felt different. No fear, no dread, no grief, just space. Space to breathe, space to grow, space to exist without shrinking. After breakfast, I pulled out the navy journal I'd bought from the bookstore and opened it to yesterday's page. A simple line stared back at me. I am beginning again. I touched the words with my fingertip, letting their truth settle. Around noon, a soft knock echoed at my door. When I opened it, Maria stood there with 2 mugs of hot chocolate steam curling into the hallway. "You shouldn't spend New Year's alone," she said, stepping inside, without waiting for an invitation. I smiled. "I'm not alone." We sat on the couch sipping hot chocolate while watching the soft snowfall outside. She talked about her holiday plans, her kids calling from out of state, her sister, sending photos of a chaotic family dinner. I listened, not with longing or envy, but with a quiet warmth. I had a different kind of family now. One chosen one, gentle one, small but real. Later, I walked with her down the hall to the elevator. As she left, she squeezed my hand and said, "You look lighter, Lena, like you put something heavy down." "I did," I replied softly. When she disappeared behind the elevator doors, I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like a soft scarf. Then I returned to my apartment and opened my laptop to a few new emails. 2 newsletter subscriptions, a work update, and one from Morgan. Subject line: Happy New Year, Lena. The message was short. "I know I hurt you. I know I didn't see you. I want to be better. Whenever you're ready, your little sister." I read it twice. Then again. My heart didn't clench the way it might have last year. I wasn't swimming in resentment nor drowning in guilt. I only felt something quiet, something that felt like distance but not detachment, like a wound that had healed but still remembered where it used to hurt. I typed slowly. "Happy New Year, Morgan. I'm not ready yet, but I appreciate your message." I hit send and felt no tremor, no fear, just honesty. I closed my laptop and moved through the apartment, adjusting small things as I went. The placement of a candle, the angle of a photo frame, the throw blanket across the couch, the lamp that glowed warm and golden in the dimming afternoon light. Every touch felt like a whisper of ownership. This was my life now, my home, my beginning. As the sky faded into winter lavender, I lit the candle on the coffee table and sat cross-legged on the rug. I opened the navy journal again and wrote another line beneath yesterday's words. I don't need them to change for me to move forward. The truth of it seemed to settle in the room like a soft exhale. Right then, my phone buzzed once. A voicemail. I didn't check it immediately. I left it on the counter and returned to my tea, letting the aroma wrap around me like a blanket. When I finally listened to it later, my father's voice drifted through the speaker, quiet, unsure, almost unfamiliar. "Lena, Happy New Year. Your mother and I, well, we hope this year is kinder to you than we were. We hope you're warm tonight." I sat for a long moment after the message ended. Not angry, not aching, just thoughtful. Some apologies arrive too late to repair anything. But they can still arrive. And that, I realized, was enough for me. Not to reconcile, not to return, not to forget, but to close the door softly instead of slamming it. Around 8, I stepped onto the balcony for the last time that night. Snow fell in light flakes, drifting across the river like delicate confetti. I pulled my sweater tighter and breathed in the cold, sharp air. The city lights shimmered, reflecting off the water in soft streaks. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks popped faintly, the sound carried across the river like a distant heartbeat. 1 year ago, I had been alone in a cold house, with a note that told me exactly where I stood in my own family. Today, I stood somewhere else entirely. On my own feet, in my own space, with my own life. And I was no longer afraid of any of it. I leaned on the railing watching the snow fall and whispered to myself I didn't lose a family. I found myself. A warmth spread through me deeper and steadier than anything they had ever given me. And if you're here with me now, listening to this story, holding space for it, maybe you understand something about loss or betrayal or letting go. Maybe you've been taken for granted too, or made small or forgotten by people who were supposed to love you. So let me leave you with this. Your peace matters. Your voice matters. Your life is yours to reclaim. If any part of my story resonated with you, even just a line, tell me in the comments. Share your own experience, your own strength, or just let me know you're here. I read every word, and your support means more than you know. And if you want to hear more stories like this about healing, transformation, quiet revenge, and finding your way back to yourself, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you're allowed to choose a life that finally feels like yours.